Let's be honest, when you hear the word sacrifice, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's a core part of our faith. But what if the picture we have in our minds is, well, based on a big misunderstanding of what it meant in the first place? In this explainer, we're going to dig in and find out what was really going on. You've probably heard this lyric, right? It's a powerful line from a really popular hymn, and it sums up a super common view of the cross. Jesus died to pay off an angry God and satisfy his need for justice. Now, there's a fancy theological name for this: penal substitutionary atonement, or just PSA. Think of it like a cosmic courtroom. We're the guilty ones, God is the judge, and Jesus steps in to take our punishment, the penalty, so that the judge is satisfied. But that begs a huge question, doesn't it? Is that whole courtroom idea what the Old Testament sacrifices were actually about? To figure that out, we have to go back to the source material itself and see what the ancient sacrifices were really for. So where do we start? Well, our very first clue is hiding in plain sight, right in the language. The words we use are a really big deal, and one single word here might just change the whole picture. The Hebrew word for atonement is kafar. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Scholars have traced this word back to an even older word, kupuru, and its meaning is the key to everything. It doesn't mean to cover a debt, it means to wipe clean or to cleanse. That little detail, it changes everything. We should be thinking of atonement less like a legal payment and more like a spiritual detergent. The blood from a sacrifice wasn't paying a fine. It was the cleaning agent used to purify whatever sin had made dirty. And this idea of cleansing just gets stronger in the New Testament. The writers often use the Greek word hilasterion to talk about Jesus' work. Now, to their original audience, that word pointed to something very specific: the mercy seat, the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. And what was that? It was the place of God's presence, a place for cleansing and connection, not punishment.
Okay, so if the word itself points to cleansing, what about the actual offerings? Let's take a quick tour through the sacrifices in the Torah and see what they were really for.
Here are the 5 big ones. And as you look down the list of what they were for, you start to see a pattern. It's all about devotion, thanks, and fellowship. And even the ones for sin, they were about cleaning up sacred space and making things right, restoring relationships, not taking a punishment. Now, what's just as important is what you don't see here. The sources are crystal clear. Nowhere in the Torah does it say these offerings were to calm down an angry God or pay off some legal debt. That idea of punishing an animal instead of a person, it's just not there. And this really gets to the heart of it. As the scholar N.T. Wright points out, the killing of the animal was never the main event. That was just the step you had to take to get the blood. It was the life in the blood that was the powerful ingredient used to clean and purify the sanctuary. You see, in the ancient world, sin created this sort of spiritual pollution, an aerial miasma that would actually stain God's holy dwelling place. The problem wasn't an unbalanced checkbook in heaven. It was that God's home was getting contaminated, and if it got too dirty, his presence would have to leave. The sacrifices were basically the spiritual cleanup crew. Which brings us to our star witness, the most famous and maybe the most misunderstood ritual of them all, the Day of Atonement, and of course, the scapegoat. So let's walk through this because it's so important. They chose 2 goats. The first one was sacrificed, and its blood was used, just like we've been talking about, as that spiritual detergent to cleanse the sanctuary. But the second goat, the famous scapegoat, it had a totally different job. The priest confessed all the people's sins over it, and then it was led away, alive, out into the desert. And right there, that's the detail that blows the whole thing wide open. The one animal that is symbolically carrying the sins of the people is specifically sent away alive. The goal wasn't to punish sin, it was to banish it, to physically remove it from the community. I mean, you have to ask yourself, if this whole system was about death being the penalty for sin, wouldn't the goat carrying all the sin be the one that gets killed? Instead, it gets a free pass out of town. The whole logic of the ritual is about purification and removal, not punishment. It completely flips the script. So, if we start to look at all the Old Testament sacrifices through this lens of cleansing and purification, how does that change the picture of what Jesus did on the cross?
Well, you end up with two totally different portraits of Jesus. In the penal substitution view, he's the victim of God's punishment, paying off a legal debt. But in this purification view, he's the active high priest, willingly offering himself to cleanse all of creation, defeat the real enemies of sin and death, and bring humanity back to a loving God.
And get this, the New Testament adds another fascinating layer. It says Jesus wasn't even from the priestly tribe of Levi. He was from Judah. The book of Hebrews makes a huge deal out of this, saying he's starting a brand new, better priesthood. He's not just another sacrifice in the old system, he's doing something completely new. And this is the bottom line. This understanding transforms Jesus from a cosmic whipping boy, absorbing God's rage, into a victorious king and high priest, actively conquering the enemies of humanity to bring us all back into God's loving presence.
Okay, so we've gone pretty deep into ancient rituals and Hebrew words. But why does any of this really matter for us right here, right now?
It matters because these two ways of seeing sacrifice aren't just slightly different. They give us two profoundly different pictures of God's character, of who he is and what motivates him.
And that's really the final question we're left with. What is the cross truly about? Is it the story of God saving us from himself? From his own uncontrollable anger? Or is it the story of a loving God on the ultimate rescue mission, triumphantly defeating the real enemies, sin and death, once and for all? As you can see, the answer to that question, it changes everything.